at the Q&A and talk portion. I'd like to invite David to come in front, and also the other members of the William Bill Campbell Chapter of the Tuskegee Airmen Incorporated. If you'd like to join David up in front, and we'll just they'll do the Q&A. We'll get more seats here. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Hopefully you enjoyed the movie. If you have any questions right now, please ask them. Because I do have some presentation. Yes, ma'am.
What happened to those men after the war? Were they able to be successful in their jobs that they wanted, like engineering?
Many of them, well, in the beginning, almost all of them were college graduates. So yes, they were. Some of them became doctors and lawyers and different things, politicians. One of the airmen was a mayor of one of the major cities, Detroit, wasn't it? Mm-hmm. Yes, they were successful. Anything else? Anything about the movie itself? Yes, sir.
I was at Tuskegee University a couple of years ago, and I saw a beautiful monument of jet aircraft commemorating the Tuskegee Airmen, and I wanted to ask, what is the present connection between the Tuskegee location and is there a National Guard?
Where you were, where you
is there a connection, I guess?
Yes, there is a connection. Where you were was Moulton Field. That was a basic training field for the all of the pilots that went through there.
Okay.
I say all. It wasn't all. They actually were 3 fields that they trained at, but that was a basic training for the fighter and bomber pilots. There was another one that that a few of the pilots were trained at. They were the liaison forward observation pilots who fly like Piper Cubs, and they spotted for the artillery. Ma'am? Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
Are all of you pilots, or what is your?
The ladies here are not pilots, but they are family of airmen like I am. The 2 gentlemen over here are pilots.
As much as my father loved flying, that's how much I hate it.
This is one of my friends. He is not one of our members, but he is a pilot. He was an Air Force pilot. A fighter pilot.
I just wanted to let you know that he was asking a question about is there a unit that represents the Tuskegee Airmen, and it is. The Montgomery Air National Guard now, they're called the 87th Tactical Fighter Squadron, and they are representing by having their tails painted red.
And by the way, there are at least 1 or 2 other outfits in the military that have the numbers of the Tuskegee Airmen. There's a 332nd. That's I think they're a reserve outfit as well, and they've been in combat overseas, but they are very proud to have the red tails on their planes. I saw another hand back there. Yes?
You said at the beginning there were some errors in the movie?
Well, yeah, there's a couple of errors. Probably one of the major ones is did not lose any aircraft that they escorted. That's not exactly true anymore. What happened was that came out probably a month after they started escorting the bombers, and they did have an initial no loss record, but a little after that they did have some losses, and so that statement was not true. Let's see, what else? One of my favorite parts of the movie is when they had the problems with the mechanical problems and they landed in front of the chain gang. The story actually comes from a gentleman who lived in Hayward, one of our original Tuskegee Airmen. And what his story was, and what he went with, and I've heard him tell the story before. He's long past now, but Woody Spears is his name, Leon Woody Spears. Some of you may have heard him speak because he spoke quite a bit before he passed. But his story was that the airport that they landed at, and it was an airstrip. It was a grass strip. It was a scheduled landing. And yes, there was the chain gang that was working on the end where they landed, where they stopped. And when they saw it was the black pilots, they started cheering and going, they just went crazy about that. And the guard said, "Oh, we can't have this." So he packed them up in the truck and moved them to the other end of the runway. But that was the actual truth. Yes, ma'am.
A few months ago, or maybe a year ago, I got some information about the red tail and how we can support them, and so I've been sending checks. Would you let this group know that they have a way to support the red tail?
Well, yes, there is. There's several different organizations. There's a Red Tail Project, which is run by the Commemorative Air Force, and they support P-51 Mustang. It's a C model, and it's got the colors, the red tail colors, and it is supported by your contributions. Now we have our own 501c3, so our chapter also will take donations from the people. I have business cards if you have any interest in doing that with us. Now getting back to the movie, they showed the pilots only flying P-51s. That was erroneous in that the 99th initially flew P-40s. And they flew those in North Africa, and when they met up with the other 3 squadrons, that's when they started flying other aircraft. And they had 4 basic fighter planes that they flew: the P-40, the P-39, which they didn't like, the P-47, which they did like a lot more than the Mustangs actually, and then the Mustangs were the P-51s, in which you saw in the movie. One more thing that was an error: Cuba Gooding Jr. played a character called A-Train, and he was killed in the movie. I met A-Train. He did not get killed in the movie. Yes, sir.
Could you tell us about your father, Major John O. Cunningham?
My dad was a liaison forward observation pilot. He got his basic flight training there in Tuskegee, one of the strips away from Tuskegee itself, but it was still part of the project. He went from there, well, there were 3 classes. There were about 72, I think, who were the initial numbers that went through the training, and only 51, I think, was the final number of the 3 classes, an average of 17 out of the class, each class. And what they did was they divided up. One of the things they didn't, I don't know if you caught it or not, but the military was segregated. We actually had two Air Forces. Not only the Air Force, Army Air Corps actually, but the entire military. The forward observation pilots were their jobs were to spot for the artillery, the black artillery that was segregated, who were trained in Fort Huachuca, New Mexico or Arizona. Okay, and that's where they trained, and they split up, and half of them went to the South Pacific, and the other half went to Europe. I have a book. I'll have to show it to you. I didn't bring it up here with me. Didn't have it with me, and I looked my dad's name up online, and it referenced this book and a page number, and there's a picture of my dad in that book. And but he was flying in New Guinea, and the Solomons, and then eventually the Philippines. Yes, ma'am.
So it appeared that most of the African-American pilots all had college degrees, were in college. Was that typical of white pilots as well?
At first. Eventually both were accepting as little as a year of college. And in some cases, some of the pilots were not college trained. They were taking enlisted people in to do some flying. Yes, ma'am.
I worked at Camp Kilmer, which was a port of embarkation in New Jersey. And there were black soldiers as well as white soldiers in the PX, and they weren't barracked in separate barracks or anything.
On the military bases, they were mandated not to be segregated.
Okay.
But when the war was actually going on out there, it was pretty much like the movie showed. One group of pilots I did not talk about were the bomber pilots. They flew B-25s, and we had a number of our local fellows that were involved with that. Okay, and he flew B-25s. Now they did not go to combat because they had their bosses, a general and a colonel, that would redirect them and change things up. So they got a whole lot of training, but they never made it to combat. And it wasn't until they were removed and Benjamin O. Davis Jr. came in as the commander there and got them trained, fully trained to be ready for combat. But by the time they got to that point, the war in Germany was over, and the Japanese were losing, and they were about to surrender. And I like to say that when these guys got their orders, that's when the Japanese surrendered. They were coming. Rather, it wasn't those 2 bombs that they dropped. It was this group. Any more questions?
Was that Eleanor Roosevelt? Did that actually occur?
Yes.
In that way?
That's another erroneous part of this story. Because in this story, Eleanor Roosevelt flew with a cadet. And she was actually there before the cadet program started. And she flew with a man named Chief Anderson, and who was the chief flight instructor for all of the pilots that were training there. And he was as highly respected as Benjamin O. Davis. And in that, he was a self-trained pilot. He trained himself on how to fly because nobody would teach him because of his color. And what he did was he bought an airplane, he had worked at airports, and listened to the stories of the pilots that were flying at the time. And he bought his airplane, and what he would do is start up the engine and taxi down the grass strip. They didn't have paved strips, paved roads, runways like they do now. They're just grass strips. And he would taxi down the runway, and each time he'd come back and go a little faster and a little faster. Pretty soon the plane took itself off. Then he had the honor of bringing it back without damaging it, and him. And he got to be very good at what he was doing.
Dave? Oh, go ahead.
There's a question down here. She keeps raising her hand.
Yes. Who?
Oh, in the hat. Is she?
Oh,
Okay,
yes.
Yeah.
Oh, no, I was just, he had already said it, the favorite part of the movie was my favorite part as well, when they landed in the field and when they noticed that it was black pilots. And that one particular guy, which was really kind of a little old, his eyes and the surprise on his look, that it kind of brings back memories when my grandmother was alive. That was a long time ago, that the look on their face, how proud. It really touched me, that part really touched me.
Yeah.
To see that expression on his face, it just seemed so real.
But one of the things that we do know is that when the program was going on, the whole country knew about it. So it wasn't something that was unknown. But they kind of made it look like they were just seeing this for the first time. They may have just seen them, seen black pilots for the first time, but they knew that they existed.
I'd just like to add something real quick, if you don't mind. My father was Tuskegee Airman, Lieutenant Colonel Charles Harris Drummond Jr., who was also a helicopter pilot, one of the first he stayed in the Army. I didn't actually understand that until 1995, when we went to the 50th anniversary of the Air Force over at Nellis Air Force Base in Vegas. And that's when I learned that the Army Air Corps was born, or the Air Force was born out of the Air Corps, but he decided to stay in the Army because they were testing these new things called helicopters, and he wanted to be a part of that. One of the things that I wanted to say was that in the current climate that's going on today, and I'm not going to get political, so no, is that it's very important for us to remember that everybody helped build this nation, and we are a nation of immigrants. And whatever your beliefs are, that's a truth. That's not an alternative fact. And we need to realize that. And the other thing I wanted to say was about your question or your comment about awe. When I was little, I didn't understand what my father represented. He was just my dad, and the person that tucked me in. I actually didn't really know him until I was about 8, because he was off in Vietnam commanding helicopter squadrons over there. And but Armed Forces Day always holds a special place in my heart, because I remember him in his uniform, his dress uniform, at Fritchie Airfield, outside of Marine, outside of Fort Ord, where he commanded. And the look on the kids' faces that would come from the schools to, you know, like, who is this man? You know, and I would just sit there and I was very proud because that was my dad. But I don't know if you guys noticed in the movie that Lawrence Fishburne's character, how he started out very innocent, but then got that swagger, and he was talking about that respect. And that's something that I learned watching these Tuskegee Airmen and my father's friends over the years, and Colonel Campbell, who our chapter is named after, who actually did see combat in France, who's in France, was that swagger. And it's something that resides in me. And when I see that in the movie, and some of you may have seen me tearing up during the movie, because I do that every time I see this guy.
I have tissues.
Yeah. It's the swagger that gets me in this movie. The fact that these guys, and that inner turmoil that Colonel Davis, General Davis, talked about, is something that resided in all of them. And it was a conflict that they had to work out about the way that their country treated them. And so that's why I want to circle back to my original point about it's the way that we treat each other. And we need to look at that. We're all human beings, and if you cut us, we all bleed red blood. And that's really important. I think that's the most important statement that this movie makes.
Yeah, I was just gonna say.
We have much to learn.
Hi, my name is Bridget Hendricks, and I too am a heritage member of the Tuskegee Airmen. I'm a niece of George W. Porter. Now, I'm just going to give you a quick story of what my uncle used to tell me as I used to sit at his feet. He was a master sergeant, my uncle was. And he would say sometimes the new pilots would come in, and they would have a little bit of arrogance about themselves, like you saw on the plane in the movie. And so, Master Sergeant, he was a mechanic and would fix the planes. So they would come to him, you know, where's my plane? Is my plane ready? Hurry up, let's go. And my uncle would say, okay, he'd be very humble until they got out on the airfield. They were getting ready to take off. And my Uncle George would say, all right, now here's your fuel gauge. Is that on full or empty? And they'd say, well, it's on full. Now, come on, I gotta go, hurry up here. And my uncle says, you keep an eye on that while you're up in the air, okay? He would never have any more problems. And when we were calling the movie, he says, this is not your plane, this is my plane. So that's one of the very, very special stories that I can recall from hearing from my uncle as sitting at his feet. Okay.
I was a Tuskegee Airman, but I did go to Tuskegee in '86. I had an opportunity to meet several of the pilots that flew. I met Chief Anderson. I met a lot of fine men there. As a matter of fact, I would go to Tuskegee for the next 20 years off of Memorial Day, a weekend, and we had a wonderful time. And I'll let Brother Brent.
My name is Ben Henderson, and I owe the Tuskegee Airmen a lot. When I was in the 12th grade, down in Marshall, Texas, going to high school, every Monday we would have, in southern schools, they have something like they call devotion. This was when the schools were segregated, and our black schools used to have a devotion every Monday morning, and the principal would bring in a guest speaker. So that particular Monday morning, I was sitting there, you know, with my brain not engaged, paying that much of attention, and because they would do that every Monday, they would bring somebody up, you know, and somebody would speak. And so the principal led this person out on the stage, and I kind of sat up in my seat and started paying attention because this guy had a military uniform on, and he was a Tuskegee Airman. And the thing that stuck in my mind as a 16-year-old, when he started talking about his career, the things he had done, the thing that stuck in my mind, and still does right now, he said he'd been around the world twice. And at 16, I thought, he's been around the world twice. You know, I want to do what this guy's doing. So needless to say, a month later, I went down and joined the Air Force. And a couple of years, I had gone overseas too, you know, at 19. Military sent me to England. So I got a chance to spend 10 years in the Air Force and kind of like have a career in the Air Force. So when I was 19, the military had sent me to school in Illinois to work on B-36s, which was the biggest airplane in the Air Force inventory at that time. And I had this older guy that was in our organization, African-American guy. We were walking across the ramp one day, and somehow another World War II came up. And he said, oh yeah, he says, I was on the P-51s. And I looked at him. Jackson was a little bit older than the rest of us, and he had been in World War II. And I thought, here goes Jackson with another yarn. You know, he's stretching it again. And that was the end of the conversation. Needless, you know, I didn't know that what he was telling me was he was a Tuskegee Airman. So fast forward about 50 years later, I'm looking at a book, and here's Jackson sitting on the wing of a P-51, somewhere in, wherever he was, somewhere in Europe. Last thing, I had a cousin who was a Tuskegee Airman. Well, he started out to be a Tuskegee Airman. And the interesting thing about him was that he could fly before, he had his pilot's license before he went to Tuskegee. And he was one of the first ones that they washed out. And that was the way they did it. They only, I think, was graduating like 17 people out of a class. And so they'd have to go in and start culling people out. So they used to tell the guys when they fall out in the morning, look to your right and look to your left. Tomorrow when you fall out, those two guys won't be here. And that way they got the class cut down, you know, to the number of people that they needed to have. I think the number was 17. Because what they didn't want was the Tuskegee Airmen to graduate more people than the other base, which was 30 miles down the road that had white collars. That wouldn't make the Tuskegee experiment an experiment if they were graduating more people.
Okay, hello, I'm not a Tuskegee Airman. However, I graduated from Tuskegee Institute then, now Tuskegee University back in 1979. And I started flying signal. Oh, you still can't hear me? Okay, I graduated from Tuskegee back in 1979. And I was commissioned then as a second lieutenant in the Army as an artillery officer, but I've always wanted to fly, and I really wanted to fly helicopters. But I got in the Army, completed the artillery course, thinking I'm going to get my orders to go to Fort Rucker and fly helicopters, and they said, no, we want to send you to career now, and we're going to give all of the slot to the West Point guy to go to Fort Rucker. I'm like, wait a minute, that's not fair, that's not right. So anyway, through a lot of negotiations, I was able to resign my commission in the Army and call the Air Force up, and they said, as long as you get on with this charge, come talk to us. So I did. I called the Air Force up to say, yeah, come on and talk to us, and let's take a test to see how well you are on your pilot knowledge or whatever. I took the test, passed the test, and they said, you can't be on active duty with the regular Air Force, but you can be in a guard unit. So the guard unit that I mentioned earlier, Montgomery Air National Guard, we was flying RS-4Cs then, which is the fastest F-4 ever made. We were doing reconnaissance. I got a chance to enlist with those guys and transfer my commission to the Montgomery Air National Guard. And from that point, I started flying F-4s. And from there, we went from the reconnaissance planes, which is going out taking pictures, to the F-4D, which is air-to-air, air-to-ground, which means we're going out looking for a fight every time. We're going out looking to blow something up. I enjoyed that a lot. That was a lot of fun for me. And then I transferred, I moved out here to California. I got out of the Guard. I was in the Guard from 80 to 87, 1987. I continued to fly. until today. The guard unit, like I said, that I will tell you about now, flies the F-16, which they were, have commemorated the airplane as being commemorated to the red tails, and they painted all the tails red. So that's what it's all about.
Right. And one thing I would like to add is that my dad got stationed to Fort Riley, Kansas in 1956, and we moved in right next to her family.
I wasn't around yet, though.
And my dad and her dad flew together, flew helicopters together. My dad flew both, fixed wing and rotary wing. Any more questions? Yes, ma'am.
In the Congress part of the movie, was it close to being scrapped?
Yes, it was. It was. It's very close. And what they pretty much, actually what happened in reality, and if you saw the red tails, you would have seen that that they challenged the government to compare the records of the 99th with other similar squadrons. And it turned out they were just as good, if not better.
Can you tell us about your chapter, what you do in the community, and how can people invite you to speak to their organization or their school, or what's the best way to contact?
I have a stack of cards that I can hand out to people, especially I really like to talk to the kids in the schools. There's a need for pilots, and there's a need for mechanics right now. And I don't care what our current regime says about freezing up the government. There's still going to be a need for people in the aviation industry because it is growing right now by leaps and bounds. A couple of years ago, I worked for the FAA, and a couple of years ago I found out that the world is going to need 600,000 new pilots over the next 20 years. And we're just not 2 years into that, so we still have a long way to go. There's a lot of countries that are ahead of us and pushing real hard. So we need to revamp, and what we'd like to do is at least work with the at-risk children to get them aware of the legacy of the Tuskegee Airmen, and then bring them up to date and find out if they have the abilities and the interest in becoming pilots and mechanics and support people and get them involved in aviation.
One of the programs that we are resurrecting that I call the original chapter, I call them the old birds, because they used to sit around and talk about flying all the time, and as a kid that just wasn't really fun. But one of the things that the old birds did was they put together what's called the Summer Flight Academy, where they worked with at-risk kids and actually got them up in the air flying. And so we are resurrecting that program. Hopefully we will get it resurrected this summer, depending on our funding and planning. So if you're interested in helping us out with that, we would truly appreciate that. It's a course where, like I said, we are teaching them all the mechanics of flying. They get ground school, they get air school. David and his buddies with airplanes are actually going to donate the use of their planes. Well, not going to donate, but they're graciously going to allow us to use their planes. And as David said, there's going to be this need for pilots. So we're trying to get kids interested in aviation now. One of the things with Tuskegee also is that people don't realize that Tuskegee was not just the pilots. It was also the ground crew and the mechanics. They are also considered Tuskegee Airmen or Tuskegee graduates of the program. So we are also trying to get kids interested in that, because that is also something that is going to be needed in the next 20 years or so, are mechanics, and it's one of the reasons why I won't fly, and ground crew.
Is this local or where? How far? Where?
Yeah, we're based out of Hayward.
Oh, okay.
Well, no, we're the only chapter in the Bay Area, and we're centered in Hayward. And you know, with three major world-known cities, we have a small chapter, and we're always looking for new members to help out in any way that they want to or any way they can, whether it's financially or just warm bodies to help us do things. Right now, we have a museum that we're trying to develop over there in Hayward, and it's going to be dedicated to the Tuskegee Airmen, and we have to talk about that in a minute.
It's forever evolving, so.
Yes, it is, and I just had the airport manager remind me of that 2 days ago, so it's never out of my mind. So we are aware of it. So anyone wants to become a member, I have applications in. So, anyway.
Dave,
Yes,
you want to mention the street?
Oh, the street, what happened was, on the south side of the Hayward Airport, they got a new company that built on the field, and they needed an access road. And they named the street Tuskegee Drive. And I was mentioning to somebody earlier about fighting City Hall. Tuskegee Drive is wrong. It should be Tuskegee Airmen Drive. And I have submitted the paperwork already, and it's going through right now as we speak to change the name. It's a brand new street anyway, so it shouldn't be any problem. But it's already listed. If you look at Google, it'll even be listed there as Tuskegee Drive. But it should be Tuskegee Airmen Drive.
It
Want to
will
talk
be.
about the marker?
Yes.
And we have a marker that we're going to put on the intersection that's right off of Wenton Road there in Hayward. And we have a marker that we're going to mount there. And I'm working with the city on that too.
And the essence of the marker.
Oh, it has a picture of the P-47, and it talks about the Tuskegee Airmen. About just a little bit, just one small paragraph of what they did.
And the two people on it.
Oh. He's the one that designed it, so.
He's the project manager.
Well, he was doing all right. The essence of that marker is there are 4 people's name on the marker. 2 of the names on that marker were individuals who were fighter pilots who got shot down in Europe and were prisoners of war. And all 4 of these people whose name that appear on the marker were at one time residents of Hayward. And I thought that it was really appropriate to put those 4 names on that marker.
Did you want to say the names?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll say the names. Leon Woody Spears, that's who the museum would be named after as well. Pat Shepard, Ken Hernandez, and James Walker. And James Walker and Woody Spears were both guests of the Germans during World War II. Oh, by the way, one thing I forgot to mention. In 2007, our government, both the House and the Senate, decided they were going to honor the Tuskegee Airmen with a Congressional Gold Medal. And I have one right there. This is the actual one that I brought back from Washington. I escorted my mother there. But my father had already passed away, but she got to go with the widow. And that is a copy of the Congressional Gold Medal. It went to all of the people that were there that day. There was roughly 300 original airmen there and widows that were honored with this. And it was a private party that bought enough of these medals to go to everyone that was there. And I don't know about the big organization, but at least all of us, all of the chapters, we have about 55 chapters around the country. And we respect all of the people that got those. And if you want to, when we're finished, when you want to come up there and take a look, be my guest. Yes, ma'am.
After it's over with, do you mind if I take a picture of all of you and you're holding the...
Okay, all right. Got a photo op, huh?
Yeah, for my book.
All right, well, thank you very much. Thank you. Of course, I'll be around.